Thanks, everybody. I guess as a New Mexico native, I can maybe have the pleasure of welcoming you all if you've traveled a ways to New Mexico. A lot of this is going to be pretty common to heifer development, across the world maybe, but because of where we are, I thought I'd kind of put a little southwestern emphasis on this. So we are going to talk specifically about rangelands and some of these situations. So basically, selection and development. So background is going to be pretty basic. So we all know heifers should have their first calf by 2 years of age. We know that puberty is determined by two things: age, of course, according to breed type, which is earlier for the English breeds, a little bit later for continental and American breeds. Body weight, it's a percentage of mature weight, has been mentioned this morning. What that percentage is may be somewhat open for discussion, but it is a real thing that we acknowledge. We know that heifers that are born in the first half of the calving season, or maybe even the first 2/3 of the calving season, should be more physiologically mature because of age, and therefore more likely to be pubertal. So, as extension folks and research people, we know this 2-year-old heifer to be a problem. Just because we know it doesn't mean that it doesn't continue to be a problem out there across the country. So those 2-year-old first calf heifers that are pregnant with their first calf, and we're going to try to get them bred back. We spend a lot of time trying to make sure that happens for good reason. And I'll show you some data that I'm sure has been presented to this group in the past, USDA and some of those places that kind of emphasize why it's so important that we get these heifers started correctly early in life. So there's some challenges for selection, particularly in this part of the world. Knowing calving data. It's great if we can, these are the oldest heifers, these are the ones I'm going to, look at and pick. But a lot of these pastures are great big, and the labor's not available, and even if it was available, sometimes you just don't see them. So these extensive type systems, extensive range systems, knowing calving date is often not possible. Okay? So whether you're up in the Jemez Mountains in New Mexico or in the Chinati Mountains down there in the Big Bend, seeing those cattle is pretty challenging sometimes. So calving date is something that we sometimes don't have the luxury of having. So what are the options if we don't have calving dates when we're going to go select heifers? Pick from among the biggest or heaviest heifers at weaning. We would expect them to be the most mature. We would expect them to take relatively less feed to reach target breeding weight relative to the lighter ones, whatever that may be. It's probably no surprise though that genetic correlations have been reported between about 0.65 and 0.85 between weaning weight and mature cow weight. So that, indirectly over time could certainly lead to selecting for bigger cows, which most of us don't want, particularly in limited environments like we're in right here. This was mentioned this morning. It's one of the good things about getting to go a little bit later. You can add stuff to your talk and sit back. I love this, and I've used it. I've used it many times to explain to people why we got such terrible results on AI, particularly. The heifers weren't just ready, so we did that. But from where I see it in remote areas and stuff, finding people with the skill set to do that, reproductive pasturing, is often a challenge. And so it's a great thing, and it's a great tool, but I just don't think sometimes it's always an option for people to use that to pick heifers. A lot of folks just keep a whole bunch of heifers at breeding, throw some bulls at them, and they pick their heifers at weaning the next year after they see who's pregnant. That obviously takes a little bit more numbers of animals to get that done. So basically, those are kind of the options that I see. I'll discuss a little bit later about one that we're looking at that might be kind of a combination of some of those. target weight, just to review, I'm sure this has been talked a lot about in this group over the years. Research in the 60s through the 80s, puberty occurs at a pretty genetically predetermined weight. That's been well reviewed. Rick Funston and Andy Roberts and a lot of those guys have, I'm sure you're familiar with this work where heifers were developed to lighter target weights, 57% of mature body weight, and they were able to reach puberty and grade at acceptable rates. They had a pretty good idea in those studies what mature body weight was. I think this was mentioned this morning by George Perry, but a lot of guys don't really know what mature body weight is in their cows. And even if they did, the variability is so great that maybe 60% gives us a little bit of 60 to 65 maybe gives us a little insurance against wrong guesses, because that's often what it is. It's a guess as to what mature body weight actually is. So challenges for development, particularly in the Southwest. I mean, drought is common across the world, but in the Southwest, it's more frequent and more often it occurs over consecutive years. So that's something that we're always faced with. Seasonal forage changes, that occurs in most places. And then timing of the breeding season to coincide with some of those seasonal forage changes. This is just a little bit of data that we collected years ago down around Marfa, Texas. We used NIRS fecal sampling to, every month, we went out and took fecal samples from this mature cow herd. We overlaid that with rainfall, and that particular ranch, they have chosen to set their breeding seasons up July, August, September, and those arrows depict the start of the breeding season. You can see the breeding season occurs, when the rain comes. The red lines are actual dietary crude protein that we measured with NIRS. The yellow line is crude protein requirements. You can see that during the breeding season in all years, dietary crude protein exceeded requirements. During the winter time, they kind of had to live off the fat on their backs. These cows were not supplemented. They were mature cows, and they got whatever they got. The other point I often try to make is in 1997, it started raining in February, and it didn't quit until October. Anybody could have done anything, probably, with regard to breeding seasons and been fine. What I like to tell producers is it's not the good years that you need to worry about, it's the bad years. So as we move on into 98, things were really starting to get dry. It didn't start raining until August of that year, and they were set up to take advantage of that. So again, coinciding, lining up your calving seasons, breeding seasons, so they coincide with the best forage quality is certainly a strategy we need to think about. I took this slide from an extension bulletin written by Jim Sprinkle and Doug Paulson at the University, when they were both at the University of Arizona. I like it because it just kind of shows the challenge that we have with smaller heifers, or smaller animals really. They don't have the rumen capacity to really digest forage the way they need to, so probably needs to be somewhere around 52% TDN before a heifer of that size is even able to meet maintenance requirements. Probably needs to be up around 60% before they're actually even able to gain about a half a pound a day. That's just pretty typical for southwestern range. That data was taken from central Arizona. This was mentioned this morning, pubertal status prior to the breeding season. That's a big one, and it's a nice thing to know. But again, in big pastures, extensive, where you don't see, not able to go out and observe whether there's estrus activity prior to the breeding season, it can be kind of tough. So this data was taken from Andy Roberts and Rick Funston in that group. Number of estrus cycles prior to the breeding season was significantly better if they had at least one or more their first year. What was interesting is this carried over even into the second breeding season. So if they'd had 3 or more by the time that second breeding season rolled around, which is, again, the most critical, that was important to know and had an effect. So timing of first pregnancy, again, this has been well discussed in this group, I know, over the years. But when they have that first calf, will determine a lot of times what their performance is as cows, throughout their whole lifetime. Calving date, we know and calving pattern also affects weaning weight. Obviously, the earlier they calve, the heavier the calves are going to be at weaning. Cow longevity, that's been shown to also be affected, and also even the financial side of things, lifetime return on investment. So this was some data taken from L.R. Sprott. He never did publish this. I chastise him about that every time I see him. But he basically took 5 herds, 1,500 cows that had calved annually throughout their lives, and broke them into 4 groups. Those calving in the first 21, second 21 on across days of the calving period. It was consistent across all 5 herds. Obviously, the ones that calved earliest over their lifetime had average weaning weights that were consistently higher across their lifetime. Calving interval, again, this is some of the stuff from USDA Research Center. Calving period 1, 2, or 3 affects pregnancy throughout the 6th year of their life. Okay? I'm sure you all have probably seen that in past years in this group. Same cows affecting longevity, age at which they were first opened. Those that were early calvers were over 8 years of age when they were first opened. Those that were calved later in the latter 2 periods were about 6 months behind that on average for a little over 16,000 cattle. The data was repeated again in South Dakota, which pretty much showed the same results. So that, again, when they have that first calf is important. That same group of cows, they looked at performance of their steer calves, and again, USDA choice and better for calving period 1 was across the board there. So it's important. Okay, this is some of that same data that LR never did get published, but it's pretty neat stuff, I think. Whether the ranch made money in all those groups or whether the ranch lost money, average lifetime return on investment was better for the earlier calving cows. So management strategies, shift a little bit and talk about some of the things we may or may not have at our fingertips, particularly in this part of the world. I would put the caveat that everything I'm going to kind of throw up here is based on having grass and having, degradable protein in the diet. That said, some old work, and I show this a lot, extension talks that was done right over the hill here at Carpenter, New Mexico, long ago when I was an undergraduate here with Joe Wallace and some of the folks he worked with. They looked at the frequency of feeding high protein supplements to developing heifers in 2 trials. They either fed protein, 7 pounds once a week, say on Saturday, or they fed an equivalent amount by the end of the week, 3 times a week. Pregnancy rates were nearly identical in 2 trials. Again, in these probably not that big a deal in places where you have small pastures, but where you got to get out and spend half a day or all day feeding, that can add up pretty quick. So they saved about 60% in transportation and labor costs by doing that once a week. Again, that only works if you've got grass. Okay? So they've got to have the supplemental protein to help them digest the grass is basically what we're talking about there. So nutritional plane, this was some other work that was done here at Mexico State, and it's been, Endicott and Funston summarized a lot of these studies in that paper. But basically, range-developed heifers have shown compensatory gain once they get on high-quality summer forage. Again, that's the key. They got to have that. If they're restricted all the way through the breeding season, that doesn't work. But I do think some of these, like that picture I showed you from Marshall, where they were actually, below their requirements during the winter, and when it did finally rain, a lot of that probably is compensatory gain. So, again, nutritional plane times rumen degradable or rumen undegradable protein that work has been done here, a lot of it at New Mexico State. Again, the caveat there, degradable protein is the first priority, but when that is mixed in the proper ratio, sometimes that has some promise with helping develop heifers. Down here at Las Cruces in southern New Mexico, they show that putting a little bit of rumen undegraded protein in the salt mix helped increase metabolizable protein in these cows just by doing that. Some of the same groups here at MSU have shown improved glucose metabolism and weight gain in heifers by using some rumen undegradable protein in the diet. And in this study, they basically pasture-developed heifers with a 36% crude protein supplement, with either 30% of that being rumen undegraded or 50% of that being rumen undegraded versus feedlot heifers. And again, there was a tendency here for the 50% rumen degradable protein to have better preg rates. But what was more interesting to me, at least, is the retention rate in those heifers was significantly better than it was for the other two treatment groups. So that may have some promise. I know Dr. Solderdis is going to probably talk a little bit more about this later in the week. But they've done the majority of that right around here at the Corona Experience. Another management tool would be ester synchronization. You know, that's nothing new, especially for this group. You know, it's been around for 50 years to tighten up calving seasons and add value to calves simply by creating uniformity of your calves. Whether it's in a fully AI system with, you know, higher weaning rates and weaning weights, or if it's in a natural service system, we know that putting a synchronization program in place, we can get more calves born earlier in the breeding season, heavier weaning weights, and more valuable carcasses. Again, some of that's been shown by Rick Funston and his group up there at Nebraska. So, back to the question, how do we pick replacement heifers? And how do we manage them to be early calvers? The oldest would be the most desirable, at least in my opinion. Just go out there and pick from the ones that you know are the oldest. Hopefully they won't all be the biggest, but we don't always have that. So, sometimes you just got to pick the prettiest ones. And a lot of people, that means the biggest ones. Reproductive tract score at breeding is certainly a viable option, but not always in all places. Just keep a bunch and expose them all and keep those ones that were pregnant the next year. Again, that adds a whole other level of stocking and things like that, but people do that. So I got to thinking about some of this and some of the things that I've observed over the years with AI on large ranches and some of the things you can see over successive years of AI, and we've all seen it. You know, it tightens up. Just end up with fewer open cattle after 4 or 5 years of ester synchronization and AI. So I got to thinking, well, maybe we could do a little something along those lines. So we've got 339 commercial heifers on 3 ranches. One ranch was in La Pryor in South Texas. La Pryor's about halfway between Laredo and Uvalde. And I'll show you in a minute. Very unfortunate for this trial, but that turned out to be the single driest spot in Texas this year. They got 4 inches of rain from the time we palpated last year to the time we palpated this year. So it was a disaster down there this year. Canadian Texas, which is up at the very top of the panhandle, we had 100 heifers up there. They were commercial black and red Angus with a few Hereford crosses mixed in there. They had a 103-day breeding season. And then the third herd, we had 112 heifers, black and Angus with some Hereford crosses on a 90-day breeding season. Valentine is down here right close to Marshall. So what we did, based on one of the AI protocols, we gave them 4.5 to 5 days after we turned the bulls in. We brought the heifers back in and we gave them a 2 cc shot of prostaglandin. Been mentioned already this morning, but again, prostaglandin won't abort pregnancies less than about 6 days. So we're safe there. And I think I visited with Rick Funston a little bit. They actually did some of this, not with early pregnancy testing, but they actually did do this program with Natural Service and some cattle up in Nebraska as well. But what we did was we came in at 40 days with an early blood pregnancy test. And the reason we did it at 40 days is because that synchronizes these cattle in a 12-day window. So, 40 days would pick up any of those cattle that responded and bred in that 12-day window. So, hopefully, I think we were able to identify heifers that were pubertal at the start of the breeding season. We didn't have to go out there and watch them and all that stuff. They were pubertal because they either cycled naturally on day 1 to 5. That meant they were already having ester cycles before we started breeding them, like some of that earlier data I showed you. Or they were pubertal and had, corpus luteum and were able to respond to prostaglandin on day 7 to 12. So we identified them as being pubertal, and we also identified them as being fertile, in that they got pregnant in that first 12-day period. So, before I show you the really ugly stuff, let me show you some ugly pictures. That's the South Texas ranch last week. They were never out of grass. They're very conservatively stocked down there, but those heifers were not supplemented at all from the time that they were, from last September till this August, well, till this July, they had not been supplemented. So it's pretty dry. Could always be worse, I guess, if they were grazed closer. That's what they looked like last week when we palpated them. They had been on 4 pounds a day of cottonseed cake for the last month, but that's a little late. So they probably looked a little rougher than that during the breeding season. All right. So there's our results to date. This is ongoing. I'm a little hesitant to sometimes show data that's not complete, but I think based on some of the previous work that's been done, it might be okay to kind of approach this a little bit. So pregnancy rates the first breeding season on yearling heifers were very good and pretty much consistent across the 3 ranches. About 50% of the cattle across the 3 ranches responded to treatment and got pregnant in that first 12 days of the breeding season. If we looked at average herd weights, they're there. Median herd weights are here. What was interesting to me, again, on average, kind of about half of those cattle that responded to treatment were below the median herd weight. So, that might be a way to maybe pick heifers that are fertile and also not run the risk of having to pick bigger ones if we don't know what the calving date is. All right, here's where it gets ugly. We haven't got these cattle palpated. We won't get that data till next month. But we did go down there last week, and it was a wreck. They just, with no supplement and that dry, they had about a 40% breed up on those heifers. 42% if they responded to treatment. They had 42% preg rate. If they didn't respond to treatment, 38. That's not significant. Hopefully, this story will be a lot different when we get that data collected. I hope it will. But that's kind of where we are with that. And just for fun, I got with the extension economists down there, and we kind of threw some numbers at this because, again, I guess you might call that a traditional deal where you go out to the pen at weaning and say, I'm going to got a 12% replacement rate or a 15 or 20 or whatever it is. You keep enough heifers back to fill that replacement rate. So basically, you're keeping a lot fewer heifers to work with. So, let's just say in October you wean 100 head, you keep 15. Next October you bring them back in, preg test 15, sell the open ones, keep 12 for replacements. With this particular one, you wouldn't have to, but we kept all 100 head. We gave them April, we gave them those synchronization shots. In May, we did our early pregnancy testing to ID those that responded to treatment. Then in October, we brought everybody back in, preg tested, and picked our 12 replacements, let's say, from the responders, and then we were able to sell several more pregnant heifers, which added value, yes, and plus the opens. When you run the numbers, that's why I got an economist to help me with this, because you have to look at replacement heifer opportunity costs and the value of keeping all those heifers. We also looked at the cost to run a heifer for a year from the cow-calf budgets from that Valley area. Of course, revenue would be sale of open heifers, sale of actual pregnant heifers, and then we have to value the pregnant heifers that we keep back and don't sell. So after all that's said and done, it's pretty much even. It's just we're talking different money. We keep more, we're going to have to spend more, but hopefully we'll make it up on the value-added side of that. So it's just kind of something I wanted to look at. So the implications of this, again, I would emphasize that these trials are ongoing. The 2-year-old pregnancy data is not yet available for those other 2 ranches. We anticipate, based on some of this other data that we've all probably seen, we anticipate that heifers that conceived within the first 12 days of the breeding season should have higher pregnancy rates as 2-year-olds, and we would think throughout the rest of their lives. These methods might be a way to identify and select directly for puberty and fertility in extensive situations where we don't often have options to get out there and watch them all the time. I think I mentioned this, but if body weight and frame score were taken in breeding and measured in conjunction with this protocol, you would have the option to go back in time and maybe pick those heifers that responded to treatment that were from the lighter end of those animals, just smaller animals, but still pubertal and fertile. Like I said, it adds significant cost, but it also adds value, the opportunity to sell more pregnant heifers. And again, we're talking about drought, Southwest, and things like that. We talk all the time, at least I do when I talk to producers, about managing a core herd of breeding cattle and keeping some stocker cattle around on the edges to put and take. You know, a situation where we did keep back more heifers might give us an opportunity and to have a sort of, if you want to think of that as a stocker enterprise for that. So I think that wraps it up.